Thank you for the question. None of it is going to be creative accounting.
The recent flurry of activity from Mark Carney's government shows one thing, that he has put his elbows down and he has bent the knee to the U.S. President Donald Trump. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. One thing we can say with certainty is that Mark Carney's reputation in Europe is tarnished beyond repair, and that he hoped to come to Canada to salvage that reputation. We are not talking about a man who's worried about his political reputation. People in political circles don't concern themselves with reputation that much. If they have a scandal, it fades. They go on with their job, and that's typically what happens. They never suffer any of the severe consequences. Mark Carney is not a politician, though. He is a businessman. He is a person who works in those fields, at least. He might not own businesses, but he tries to invest in them. Meaning, of course, that reputation matters. Reputation is a big deal in those groups. You'll always hear people talking about how it's a back room, it's a handshake. Well, it's reputation that gets those things that happen. It's a developing a relationship with the individual that allows you to make those kinds of back room and quiet deals happen. Now, he's been getting his butt handed to him by Donald Trump, and there are some things that are not going to change in Donald Trump's opinion or position. However, for sure we can say that Mark Carney has bent the knee because of a couple of actions that he's done recently in a hurry, in a flurry, in anticipation of the G7 and the NATO upcoming this month, both of which are going to be very important to the Mark Carney government. And again, not to their reputation, not to how the Canadian people feel about it, but to how the people that Mark Carney actually is trying to impress, the Europeans, care about it. Now, I'll show you the example of the announcement from the military spending, which has got all of the pundits flapping and trying to figure out what the motivation is. And I can tell you right now, the motivation is because he wants Donald Trump to play nice.
The brave women and men who are protecting our sovereignty do not have the resources they need for a riskier world. Our military infrastructure and equipment have aged, hindering our military preparedness. I'll give an example or two. Only one of our 4 submarines is seaworthy. Less than half our maritime fleet and land vehicles are operational. More broadly, we're too reliant on the United States. And so for all those reasons, I'm announcing today that Canada will achieve NATO's 2% of GDP target this year, half a decade ahead of schedule.
So you heard the spin, right? He's announcing that he's going to increase to the 2% this year, and he's doing it a half a decade ahead of schedule. Of course, the schedule wasn't his. It's funny how he will take some things from the Liberal government and say that it was his idea, and other things he'll be like, no, Justin Trudeau's not here. Before we hear the next segment of clips that are going to show you the proof that I keep talking to you about, we have to understand something about this 2% NATO commitment and the actual how they're going to be putting it to 5%, or there are countries in the NATO that are going to be pushing for 5%, and how that, with Mark Carney's 2%, he's hoping to appease both them and Donald Trump. Part of the 2% spending is going to be on infrastructure and bureaucracy. It doesn't all mean, men running around or people running around in uniform, marching up and down the streets. And it's not like that. It means, well, we've invested some money in this, we've invested some money in that. For example, you keep hearing me on this channel talk about the magnetic levitation train, which I know will be able to travel up north because it's pretty weather impervious. Now, if we were to say that we were using that to transport things to build a base, we could call that part of the military infrastructure, and that would go towards the 2%. So we have to realize that this is part of the $9 billion in spending, and the trick that Mark Carney is pulling off, and I'll use trick in quotes because it's technically accurate. He's developing more bureaucracy, which the Liberal government loves to do. And he's creating 2 new departments, right? And you'll hear here in a second. And I want you to pay close attention to when he says that we're going to be getting advice from experts, many of whom are in the room right now. Now, when you hear these series of clips, I'll let you hear it. And then if you listen to it in the sense of money, you'll understand what the angle is.
We will expand the reach, security mandate, and the abilities of the Canadian Coast Guard and integrate it into our NATO defense capabilities to better secure our sovereignty and expand maritime surveillance. As part of our new strategic approach to defense and security, we will also establish Borealis, the Bureau of Research, Engineering, and Advanced Leadership in Innovation and Science. Borealis will advance cutting-edge research in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and other frontier technologies essential to safeguarding our sovereignty. This will include our support for a new NATO Defense Industrial Pledge, which will be negotiated at the NATO summit. The Defense Industrial Pledge encompasses both assets and infrastructure that support our defense goals. Canada's Department of National Defense will immediately design a new defense policy that reflects both today's and tomorrow's threats, informed by experts, some in this room, and the experience of allies and partners, including Ukraine. We are in the process of creating a new defense procurement agency that will be guided by that new defense industrial strategy and overseen by our newly appointed Secretary of State for Defense Procurement. The Defense Procurement Agency will centralize decision-making and move at pace to get our armed forces the equipment they need when they need it.
So you could hear all of the various examples of how Mark Carney is going to be using to convince Donald Trump that he's invested in the infrastructure of Canada, to convince Donald Trump that he's invested in the military infrastructure of Canada, and how he can assuage the investments that are happening right now in Europe over the NATO 2%. He's going to create a Borealis. It's got a fancy name. It's going to try to put all of the stuff, just like they would do in North Korea, under one government umbrella. So whether it be AI, whether it be missile defense, whether it be checking the bottom of the ocean, that is going to be a disaster. However, it will be good for Canada in some respects, because there will be a lot of investment money. People will be able to rent buildings and start to investigate and develop, and all of that kind of stuff will be good for the country overall, instead of sending all of that money down into the United States to do that. Then you heard him talk about how he's going to create a procurement branch. That'll also be a disaster, primarily because the government in Canada goes about it all wrong. The way that they approach procurement is not the way that is most efficient. Nonetheless, that's more billions of dollars into the building, into hiring the people, into moving them from their various locations into this new branch of government. So that's going to add to the dollar amount. Where I would be upset is if I were in the Coast Guard. So the idea, because of the incorporating the Coast Guard, they already have a separate budget. Now he can say that that's an expenditure towards the 2%. Plus, they have probably the strongest fleet in Canada. They have a lot of boats. Now, they're not going to be, like battleships and all the kind of really stuff that you see on TV with, there's no aircraft carriers or anything of that nature, but they do have a fairly extensive fleet of ships that do patrol the Coast Guard. Whether or not they are going to be happy about being incorporated under the military umbrella is something that we should be looking at from their perspective. And how can they push back on that? I don't know. But now their budget, you see their overall budget and all of the expenditures of that now fall under the spending of this 2%. So we've taken the Coast Guard, we've added that. We're going to spend a bunch of money, just like we did with the infrastructure bank, only this time it's going to be the infrastructure for the military bank. And we're calling it a fancy name called Borealis, because everybody loves a fancy name, and we all know about the Borealis in Canada. Then we're going to take all of that technology and we're going to link it together with the procurement branch, which will take, a year to get up and running, but we will be able to spend the money on the building. We will be able to spend the money on hiring the new people. He also is going to give all the people in the military a raise, which is going to add to that 2%. Now, that I have no problem with. You know what I mean? Give them a raise. They probably deserve more than what you're about to give them anyway. So you can hear from his own words how he wants to be able to go to Donald Trump and say, look, see, I've done what you asked. And appreciate that that's why he sped this process up, is because this is the demands that are coming out of the government in the United States. There are more things that he did that can sort of show you exactly what I'm trying to say. Here's the perfect example of why I know what Mark Carney's doing is to appease Trump and only Trump, not about being Canadians. And I will tell you right now that it's not going to save the car industry, so you can forget that. However, we can see Bill C-2 that everybody's upset about because it allows them to open the mail, which I don't agree with, but I can understand why he said it. If you look down the side of this bill C2 without diving into it, we can look at all of the various things that it touches. We can see that it touches the Customs Acts. We can see that it touches the Drug and Substance Act. We can see that it touches the Controlled Drug and Substance Act. We can see it touches cannabis. It touches the Canada Post Corporation, the Oceans Act, information sharing for refugee and citizenship, and it touches immigration for refugee. All of these bodies of legislation are being impacted by this bill. The very first bill that the Mark Carney government has put out is all about these kinds of subjects. Why? Do we believe that they're touching the mail because they want to find out whether or not Mary and some guy overseas are having love letters? No, what they want to do is scan the mail coming in from overseas, whether it be packages or whether it be actual mail, because they're not looking necessarily for precursors. They're not necessarily, those things come in barrels. I mean, these guys are not playing around with a couple of grams in an envelope. What they are looking for is the ability to track forged documents. They want to know that a guy who gets mail sent to him in Vancouver doesn't then repackage that mail, this forged document, put it into an envelope, mail it down into Colorado, where the guy gets arrested, gives up all of this documentation, gets released on bail, then goes back to his apartment and switches out documentation, moves a couple of streets over, and you never hear from the guy again. And that's one of the things that they're after, so they can see the connections, and then they can tell the other bodies of government through the legislation who's sending the mail from the other end, and they can use their networks to try and go that way. This is one of the primary reason they're after it. And that they've gone into the computer parts of it because they want to know if people are being radicalized. They want to know all of these kinds of things because this is what the Americans do. This is what the Americans want to know that the Canadian government is going to be willing to do to secure the overall border of North America. That's why you don't hear me talking about it, because I understood right out of the gate that this was put in place to appease Donald Trump. It was put in place to appease people like Homeland Security. It was put in place, this document, not because he's so worried about checking on your mail. He wants to know that he can keep Donald Trump happy. Then Donald Trump says, you're not spending enough money. I mean, if you're going to spend $229 billion on bailing out your steel industry, you can throw in $9 billion just to sort of get the thing up to snuff. And then he hung up the phone, and now Mark Carney is running around going, oh no, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And he's talking a big talk about integrating here and integrating there and all that kind of stuff. But really what he's done is exactly what Donald Trump has demanded. Donald Trump gave him a set of, demands, and he did every single solitary one of them. That's why this piece of legislation was the first thing that he did, because he's trying to send a message to Donald Trump that he's going to take Donald Trump's demands seriously. The security breaches that may happen inside of the mail, I will leave to constitutional lawyers to discuss. What I'm telling you, what's imperative to this bill and what's imperative to this number, this dollar amount, is so that he can look Donald Trump in the face on the G7 and hopefully come away with Donald Trump announcing that there's been a cut on some of the tariffs. Now, Donald Trump is not going to back down on the cars. You can forget about it. You can just forget that. Those jobs are gone. Now, we're going to let Carney finish up on some of the things that he has to say, because he was asked how he's going to find the money for this. And Mr. I'm an accountant, economic finance minister, well, he was stumbling around trying to explain that.
Thank you for the question. None of it is going to be creative accounting.
Hi, Mr. Carney. Jacob Lawrence with Bloomberg News. I just wanted to ask again on how this will be paid for. Are you looking at taxes or program cuts, additional debt?
So one of the things we've said from the start in recent months is there's a few big decisions in the very near term for the government. Some of them don't cost or cost very little, which, for example, the One Canadian Economy bill, which is now before the House, will have a huge impact in terms of growth in this economy and bringing the country together. Others have a more significant impact, and you just mentioned two. Today's announcement and this focus on meeting our own responsibilities to protect Canadians, but also our NATO obligations at the same time. This decision that we're announcing today and the associated summit at NATO towards the end of this month, those are significant events from a budget perspective. And we wanted to get to a point where we had addressed those. And then secondly, as you just referenced, we have just begun the process to look for savings in government, to improve government productivity, to reallocate spending across government. We're just, last point, and so getting greater traction on that and clarity on the scale of that will be important for the budget. Last 2 points. Budget will be delivered in the early fall. The Minister of Finance will be more precise in due course.
First of all, it's all creative accounting. It's a manipulation of the words to try to convince people that something is happening that actually isn't happening. There will not be all this investment in making munitions because those are the kinds of things that take a little while to get the building built and all of that stuff. He's got a week to try to prove to people that he's spending this money. That's why those two different bureaucracies are going to be created. Will Canadian steel be used in weapons development? Perhaps, and we'll see how far they can go, how long this government lasts. Then when he was asked directly where he's going to find the money, you heard him stumble and stutter and fall around like a guy trying to find the bathroom in the dark at in a house that he doesn't live in. What I can tell you for sure is that he has no idea. He is simply going to go into debt to solve this problem. He doesn't understand where he's going to get the money. If he did, he would say it. He would shoot it off as the cuff right out of the gate. Don't look at Mark Carney as a politician. He's a man who prides himself on being able to do the accounting, to do the math. This is where he gets all of his self-worth from, guys. You have to appreciate the personality, right? And he's not alone. This is you go into Wall Street and you will find a million guys exactly like this. So you have to appreciate, or a million people exactly like this. You have to appreciate that him not having a direct answer says only one thing. I got no idea. I am going to borrow, and run the credit rating and run the payments through the roof because I have to get these tariffs stopped because for all the talk about new trading partners and all that talk, the truth of the matter is that this economy is teetering on the brink. Any minute now, half the country is going to be applying to the United States to join as an independent, as a new state. My reputation will be shattered forever. I'm going to have to go retire into one of my houses that I own. And all of these things are running through his mind. So he cares only about trying to get this problem with Donald Trump solved. And he will do whatever it takes, no matter how much money he's got to borrow against the Canadian credit, against Canadians' futures. Doesn't care. If we can develop our own stuff out of the middle of this, if we can salvage something from this train wreck, that will be worth it, right? Because Canada can dig 3 or 4 new pipelines and pay back the debts. We can develop our own military structure. We can become a warrior culture. Both of these things are going to be good for the nature of the country, for the future of the country and the future generations to come. What happens in the middle is what's going to be particularly interesting to figure out. However, what I can say with certainty is that Mark Carney is doing all of this to keep Donald Trump happy, and he has absolutely no idea how he's going to pay for it. And more importantly, for those of you out there that sit on the fence, for those of you out there that don't pay attention where you casted your vote, he had no idea what he was going to do going into it, and he still doesn't have a clue. He's playing catch up, and he's gotten down on his hands and knees and said, please, Mr. Trump, tell me what I can do. Please, Mr. Trump, tell me what I can do. And that's exactly what he's doing, whatever Donald Trump tells him to do. So technically, we probably are under, as it looks like in the government-wise, without necessarily being all on board, the 51st state. So good job on that. Oh, don't worry, guys. We're not beat yet. All right, I'm going to wrap here. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.